Dzień dobry, witam serdecznie wszystkich obecnych na dzisiejszym pierwszym wykładzie i w ogóle otwarcie Szkoły Prawa Europy Wschodniej i Azji Centralnej. Jest to już druga edycja tej szkoły, więc szczególnie miło mi powitać słuchaczy, bo zawsze się tak mówi, że tych pierwszych wita się jakby bardzo tak wylewnie, ale moim zdaniem jednak druga edycja pokazuje zainteresowanie i kontynuację, tak? Więc, że dzieło sobie nie zmarło taką śmiercią naturalną. Proszę Państwa, pan dziekan Giaro otworzy szkołę. Pan dziekan jest w trakcie międzynarodowej konferencji, więc ja nie będę przedłużał. O wszystkich sprawach organizacyjnych porozmawiamy później. Ja przekażę słowo panu dziekanowi. Pan dziekan otworzy szkołę, dalej pan profesor wygłosi tutaj pierwszy w języku angielskim wykład. Informacja była przesłana i wszystkie sprawy organizacyjne omówimy ewentualnie po wykładzie. Też witam słuchaczy online, bo ja policzyłem przed chwilą, że mamy powyżej 30 osób i tutaj część siedzi na sali i tam 16 czy 17 osób podłączyło się właśnie, tu ktoś znika, ktoś się pojawia, więc mamy prawie komplet słuchaczy, ale to dzisiaj wyjątkowo mamy możliwość jakby połączenia, bo przypominam, szkoła jest stacjonarna. Więc przekazuję słowo panu dziekanowi.
Dziękuję bardzo. Czy Państwo mnie słyszą?
Tak, tak, panie dziekanie.
Dobra, nie, no chciałem się upewnić, bo ja jestem tutaj, działam na dwa fronty, że tak powiem, bo tak jak Pan powiedział, właściwie przed chwilą byłem na międzynarodowej konferencji, też online. Dobra, proszę Państwa, więc z wielką przyjemnością otwieram drugą edycję Szkoły Europy Wschodniej i Azji Centralnej. No, jest to zasługa pana profesora Turłukowskiego, że ta szkoła doczekała drugiej właśnie edycji. No i Państwa też, że Państwo się interesują. Także bardzo mi przyjemnie, że mogę tutaj, no jakby jako gospodarz w pewnym sensie, dziekan tego naszego wydziału, że mogę, dzięki zresztą naszym informatykom, którzy właśnie zorganizowali połączenie, bo właściwie tak jak powiedział profesor Turłukowski, jest to właściwie no, w realu tak zwanym się odbywa ta szkoła, więc ona nie będzie chyba, o ile pamiętam, nie będzie właśnie zawsze tego online, tylko to jest akurat taki wyjątek. Także proszę Państwa, dziękuję bardzo i po prostu przekazuję już dalsze prowadzenie kierownikowi szkoły, panu profesorowi Turłukowskiemu. Dziękuję bardzo i życzę sukcesu w nauce. Dziękuję.
Dziękuję bardzo, panie dziekanie. To pozostaje mi przekazać słowo, żeby nie przeciągać panu profesorowi, który jest już po raz kolejny w Warszawie, ale po raz pierwszy właśnie prowadzi wykłady. Wysyłałem ogłoszenie. Pan profesor obecnie jest afiliowany w dwóch miejscach. W Kijowie, tak, to jest podstawowe jego miejsce pracy i pan profesor tym niemniej jest na stażu tak naukowym, ale takim bardzo aktywnym w Lozannie, bo pan profesor jest specjalistą od prawa porównawczego, a myślę, że on sam o sobie opowie i przechodzimy do wykładu.
Dziękuję bardzo. To witamy jeszcze naszego gościa. Panie profesorze, dziękuję, że pan zaszczycił naszą szkołę swoją obecnością. Dziękuję, do widzenia.
То є великий защит для мене przemawiać w wspaniałym Uniwersytecie Warszawskim. Mój język polski jest pasywny, jak ten pies, że wszystko rozumie, a nie może mówić. To będę mówić w języku angielskim. Today we have first, I'm glad to meet you in Warsaw University, and we will have 2 hours to speak about the place of post-Soviet legal systems on the legal map, and if it's possible, to switch on translation. Okay, in the title of the lecture, I'm saying some considerations, just because it is possible even in 2 hours to say all the things that could be said about the topic. And I will concentrate more on some foundations and even extra legal foundations, or foundations that deeper than law. And I will start with some history, and maybe this history is known for you, maybe not, you are quite young, but let us start. So the first, we have to speak about the socialist legal system and its history, and the socialist legal family. What we can, what do we know shortly about the history of the Soviet Union and the Soviet legal system? The basis for the Soviet legal system were of course ideas of Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, and later Vladimir Lenin. And in 1848, in the time of the revolution in Germany, in German states, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels formulated their ideas. Of course, they were utopists. And the first, why they were utopists, because there could be no ideas for the whole world, and for every place and for every time. Not even taken deeper the essence of every idea. But in 1917, revolution occurred in Russian empire, and then, by the way of bloody war, Bolsheviks, Russian Social Democratic Party, one wing of this party, headed by Lenin, got the power over all Russian lands and all new states that were created on the place of the Russian Empire, and of Ukraine also. Of course, the next Soviet Union was created in 1922. It was a treaty, and all the states that created Soviet Union were Russian controlled at that time, and it's important. But formally, in this treaty, by this treaty, they were recognized as formally equal states. And so this is a union of states, a union of republics. We know that there were 15 republics, and the Soviet Union existed for almost 70 years until 1991, and then ceased to exist. And we will speak with you. I will speak with you about deeper reasons, but at least for the beginning, the reason was the weakening of the central government, the development of socioeconomic processes, and of course aspirations of republics, national state aspirations. What about socialist legal family? It was created after the Second World War, and because using the Soviet occupation, and a number of states in Europe, and also in Asia, and even one state in Caribbean, a number of states created socialist legal family. It is important that Soviet troops were situated in most of these states. and bigger part of these states, especially in Europe. These states were coordinated by some organizations of economical and military nature, and all these organizations were controlled by Soviet Union, and we have to know at least two of them: the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, Совет экономической взаимопомощи, and the Warsaw Pact organization. It's military organization created, as a mirror of NATO, but not the same, but it has to be close to NATO. And these organizations were also dissolved in 1991 because of the weakening and then the erosion of Soviet Union. And besides of these socialist states, USSR, Soviet Union, promoted also the creation of pro-Soviet, pro-socialist states in the different parts of the world. By the way, USSR, Soviet Union, largely used terrorism, and in Soviet Union there were some camps who specially prepared terrorists and political activists for different countries. For example, the biggest camp was in Crimea, and it was very secret, absolutely secret, but pupils of such schools became some presidents and first secretaries of communist of socialist parties in different parts of the world. And this is a tradition of Russian Empire and of Soviet Union to prepare such terrorists and politics for other countries to win the power. And what is important, by the end of 1980s, there were about between 4 and 5 billion people in the world. And Soviet Union and socialist legal family possessed up to 2 billion people. So it's up to 40% of world population were in socialist countries. Of course, China is the biggest, but not only China, but 15 republics in USSR and certain states besides USSR. What next? All European states, post-socialist states, as well as a part of former Soviet republics, and Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, developing in the frame of civil or Romano-Germanic legal tradition now. And the development of law of other post-Soviet states, 12 another post-Soviet states, is quite complex, and it's still difficult to identify these legal systems. That's why we will think and speak about this today. Okay, in Asia, all socialist states were preserved. And the same Cuba in Caribbean, and in Africa we can speak about Ethiopia. Some people speak about Mozambique, that is still socialist. It's very difficult to evaluate. But anyway, so China, North Korea, Laos, Vietnam, Cuba, and also Ethiopia are still socialist countries. So socialist legal family not disappeared. It still exists. It's not the fact of former time. It's existing now. And for the moment, the total population of countries developing in the frame of this socialist legal family is about 1.7 billion people. Now we have up to about 6 billion people in the world, so it's less than 1/3, but still a very large population. And of course, they're transforming to some extent. For example, China leadership identified themselves as to be a socialist legal system with Chinese face. It was in 90s, and now they identify them as to be a Chinese legal system with some socialist features. So the phraseological is changing, but anyway, it's still socialist state. Besides of some market mechanisms in economy. Okay, and they were never the clones of the Soviet system, and they all the time had their own features. But anyway, in principle, in essence, they were socialist. How can I characterize, based on other researchers, the essence of Marxist teaching about the state and law? First, the socialist state does not rise from normal development, gradual development. It emerges through revolution. The conquest of power by workers of factories, urban proletariat, городской proletariat. If you know the Latin language, you understand what means proletariat. Do you know? In Latin, it's from the word proles. Proles are children. So people who have only children. People who have nothing, material, almost nothing, but proles, they have only their children. And I'm sorry for such a joke, but all that they are able to produce are children. It's something like the anecdote about the Soviet economics that some foreign specialists, let them be Japanese, visited the Soviet Union, and they saw different factories and plants and in all industry, different things, and they were asking, so now you see what is Soviet Union? They saying, yes, you have beautiful children. But we haven't, showed you just children, but industry and other things. Oh, all the things you are doing with hands are very bad. Okay. The next idea of Marxist idea, in the course of the socialist revolution, the old institutions of the state have to be destroyed. And it will be a new type of state. And the essence of this type of state is a dictatorship of factory workers. So the exercise of power by only one social class. Class is a very Marxist term, but now it's widely used. But it has to be in Latin stratum, the layer of society. But even when we say in the layer, it's also will be Marxist. Because in non-Marxist thought, there are different groups, and they could be coordinated horizontally between themselves. Different groups, one group is producing something, one group is working for somebody, and the other thing, so all the society working. In Marxist view, the society is vertical. And all coordination is vertical. Somebody dominates more, somebody dominates less, and somebody is also only dominated. But the essence of this state is not a democracy, the social state. It's the dictatorship of one class. Кто был ничем, тот станет всем. Who didn't had something at least will have everything. It's a good ideology, but if we see the society as vertical, different layers, and we are putting it, put it to the other side, so one layer is dominating over other layer. So we are not liquidating the social, inequality. Really, we just changed the roles. So now proletariat, most talented people who have only children, are dominating on intelligentsia, on intellectuals, and on businessmen, and all other parasites and enemies and other things. But you can use any phraseology. It doesn't change the essence. It's a social dictatorship of one class over another. But the idea that this state, the state of domination, will develop over time. And the state of dictatorship of the proletariat will grow, this idea, Marxist idea, into a socialist state. And then into all people state, which will reflect the interests of all working people. So not only proletariat, but also peasantry, servicemen, other people who need it for functioning of society. But by the way, the question or the issue if intellectuals are so needed in society is very philosophical in this scheme. So they are not working people. They are, just want to know something and just enjoying this. It's not a normal work. But anyway, okay. So next law in the Marxist frame is seen as a means by which the state solves its task. So the law has a service function. And law expresses the will and interests of the ruling class of the population. So in bourgeois, in a capitalist society, law is reflecting interests of capitalists, and in socialist state, it reflects the interests of workers, especially of urban workers, urban factory workers. Good. In the future, it's a total utopia, but I think some of you likes fantastics. In the future, the division of society into classes, into stratas, will disappear as a result of social economical processes. The state and law will become unnecessary, because the state and law are mechanisms to suppress and to reflect the will of one group over other group. If it will be no conflict, so state no more needed, and law no more needed. And people will want to work for society without legal obligations and without coercion. Relations will be regulated by moral norms. And all common issues will be solved by self-government, without state. It's unneeded, no conflicts. And by the way, all proletariat, all workers in all the world are brothers. And of course, between them cannot be a conflict. And Russian workers and Ukrainian workers are also brothers. How it could be a conflict? No conflict. Of course, I'm laughing, of course. So what about law in Soviet society? It's Ukrainian researcher Mykola Kozubra, quite known, to say in short, law was humiliated and considered as decorative, as formal attribute, as a respectable facade characteristic of any decent, of normal as a state. So it's like a ritual. Nobody believes in it, but of course we will use it because, you know, we are living in the world with different types of states, and to be integrated in this world, of course, we will use law, something like that. And we need it for the moment for repressions and other things, but in the future, of course, we will not need it. And other characteristic is all-encompassing control of the state over the individual, the priority of collectivist and, in fact, state interests over the interest of an individual, neglect of individuals' civil and political rights and freedom. And of course, what is connected is low level of legal culture. And that was the reason that in the time of transformation in 1980s, and then after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, totalitarian methods of government were rejected, but people could not immediately apply their rights and freedoms. They were not prepared. They were raised in another system. It's quite difficult, and transformation is still on the way. Of course, what about socialist state in more detail? The form of the government in the Soviet is the Soviet Republic, and Soviet Republic is formally similar to traditional republics, but the ruling role of the Communist Party turns it into a party dictatorship. So if you have only one party and it's this party is ruling, so it's not a democracy, of course. The rejection of the separation of powers, it was a principal rejection in constitutions and of course in practice. And the base of the state system is a system of Soviets, or system of councils. The lower council is a village council. And the next could be a district, rayon council, and then it could be oblast or regional council, and then it will be legislative council, parliament. Very formally parliament, but let it be parliament, legislative body. And this every council creates its executive committee on its level, but no one council and no one executive committee is independent, autonomous in its decisions. Because, for example, village executive committee, if it is existing, it's subordinated to village council and to district and the executive committee of the district level. And this is a democratic centralism, so-called democratic centralism. It's not democratic, of course, but it's centralism. But of course, the idea of these councils, could seem to be a good idea, but they not represented the whole population equally. And especially at the beginnings of Soviet Union, there were quotas, real quotas for workers, for peasants, and for other classes. So it's not every council not representing whole population, but groups, and every group has a quota, and some groups has a very big quotas as urban proletariat, and other have less. And many of people who are not working, who don't want to work or have feel no need in work, or unemployed, or something like that, or for any reason, they could be deprived of the right to vote at all. So they are not represented. In fact, most of them are repressed, but it's other question. But anyway, they are not represented. Okay, let it be so. The next about the state, the political regime. Political regime is, of course, was in the Soviet Union totalitarian, and the state leadership is carried out by inextricably linked party and Soviet bodies. And the life of society of individual is subordinated to both party and Soviet bodies. And subordination is through coercion, supervision, through ideology, and of course, human rights are proclaimed in constitutions. But there were no real mechanisms to realize a part or bigger part of these human rights at all. The next, the leadership role of the Communist Party. Oh, it's the most beloved part of the life in Soviet Union. The leadership of the Communist Party is enshrined, is proclaimed in the constitution. The decisions of the party occur the significance of the binding norms. Legally, decisions of Communist Party have no binding role, no any. But really, the leaders of every organizations and representatives in parliament and other things, they mostly the members of Communist Party, and they personally are binded by the decisions of Communist Party. The next, Communist Party is supervising the drafting of laws, supervising the drafting of any other normative act. And some decisions are taken in accord together by Communist Party and by government. So it's a really dictatorship of Communist Party of on any level. And if you are analyzing the Soviet law, you have to understand. And if you're analyzing the Chinese law, or what I'm talking about, it's not only the former Soviet Union. We are talking about the socialist way of thinking. So the decisions of Communist Party of China will be more important than laws. And if, of course, maybe judge in China cannot apply directly the decision of Communist Party. In motivation part of his decision, he cannot say that I'm applying not a law, but the decision of Communist Party. But really, the sense of the decision will be every time in accordance with the decision of Communist Party. And the program of Communist Party will be more than law, and sometimes higher than constitution. Okay, next about the state. Opposition is prohibited. There are some non-communist organizations, many of them. It's possible, it's normal, but all organizations, both in Soviet Union, both in contemporary modern socialist states, all this organization has to recognize the leading role of Communist Party. And they should be allied with them. So it's an alliance. And any agitation and propaganda, propaganda could be our lecture for all of you, criminals, because you are listening if you are now in China, and not only me, believe me. And any propaganda, any agitation against Communist Party is criminalized. It's not administrative offense, it's a crime. Okay, criminal offense. Strikes, other forms of protests are prohibited. And what is interesting here that all organizations are centralized. women organizations, trade unions, youth organizations, all are centralized, and the Central Committee of Association of Trade Unions will leaders of this Central Committee will attend the Communist Party assemblies, and they will be under leadership of Communist Party, of course. And economy. Economy is planned. The same, the distribution of resources and the distribution of goods are planned. And the plan, economical plan for 5 years, or it could be for 4 or for 3 years, different. They all have a status of a law, of the law. So you can develop your own entrepreneurship. Now, if you are in China, you could be a private entrepreneur, but you have to be in accord with the plan of development of economics. It's a law for you. Of course, leaders of China will communicate businessmen in real conditions today. But if they will decide that we don't need more micro schemes, you will not produce them. And that's all. If they will decide. The next, about law. The concept of the rule of law is rejected. Administrative and law enforcement bodies often ignore the constitution and ignore the legislation with regard to extrajudicial repressions, violence, forced labor, and other things. By the way, if you know the situation in China with Uyghur autonomous region, you will see that. What about the constitution of China? What about laws of China? If anybody interests in this, nobody, because not the law, but administrative practice is, is source. And but by the way, if you will compare this with some words from decisions of European Court of Human Rights, they call in administrative practices instead of law and instead of rule of law as lawlessness of society without law. So it was a society without law. And one of known comparatists, Peter de Cruz, saying, and this is true, that it was more a system of privileges than a normative system. And if you know Russian word понятие, it's a system of понятия, so it's something moral, but very interesting, because it's not a morality of all society. Sometimes it's a morality of criminals or something like that. It's a very simple scheme to understand the world, but this понятия, moral concepts that are ruling. And what Peter de Cruz saying that socialist system is a pseudo-religious system. It's close to religious one. Yes, because ideology in socialist states and in contemporary also, not only former, it's close to religion. And Saint Marx and Saint Engels and Saint Lenin or something like that, but it's almost true. What next about socialist law? The formality and inequality of human rights. It's true. I told you that to have more rights, you have to origin from right class. It will influence all your career, and it will influence the real execution of your rights. And of course, I think we do have not so much time, but the next, what is important, that Soviet Union implement formally some international legal acts on human rights. And they were ratified but not implemented. And we have a very characteristic history of Українська Гельсінська група, Ukrainian Helsinki group of in 80s, and the repressions against this group. What was the crime of this group? They published and propagated, let it be, the final act of Helsinki OBSE meeting and some other documents of OBSE that were ratified by Soviet Union. So if they ratified, they have to be a source of law, or at least be in the core of legal ideology. So why I cannot read and speak about these documents? But I can't. It's interesting. So it's not easy. It's a formal law and real law, and the difference is radical. The next about socialist law, the division of law, not of the law, it's my mistake, of law into public and private is not recognized. It was absolutely true, the domination of public law over private law. And private law is functioning in some neutral spheres, while public law is not interested in this. If public interests and public law interests in your life, you will your private rights and private interests not no more exist. The next, private property. Private property is, of course, is a foundation of any capitalist society. But what about private property in socialist countries? Private property of means of production, so any equipment, for example, for production, is prohibited. Only socialist property is possible for this means of production. And socialist property could be in two variants: state property or cooperative collective farm. It's I'm quoting, cooperative collective farm. Don't try to use your brain to understand this. But of course there were cooperatives, some cooperatives, and of course there were collective farms, not the same, but anyway. So this property was allowed. And the very interesting accent on personal ownership, personal property. Personal property and private property, you understand the difference, but personal ownership of your personal items and items that you consume, or consumptions items. And but some exemptions existed. For example, a little photo salon or something like that, but without hiring people, without hired labor. So it will be your individual individual work and no more. The next, sources of law. And this is interesting, that the sources of law, the system of sources of law, formally is close to Romano-Germanic ones. And that's why most of comparatists, a larger part of practical lawyers, they believe that they can deal with socialist systems, understanding them as a Romanic German. Oh, we see the same laws, the same codifications, the same things. Why not go to court and resolve the question? You will not solve it in the normal way. The next, the volume, the number of laws, the volume of legislation is small, because legislative bodies in socialist countries, especially in Soviet Union and now in contemporary socialist countries, is not legislative body is not working all the time. It's on permanent basis. It's meeting once, twice a year, short sessions for sometimes less than 1 week. And most of drafts is given by Communist Party, prepared by Communist Party, inspired by Communist Party, and they, ratifying some laws. Okay. Judicial practice was not formally a source of law, but this is true that the form plenums of Supreme Court of USSR and plenum of Supreme Court of Union Republic. They gave the special tips, instructions how to use law in court. And these instructions, this practice of instructions by these plenums was the foundation for all the court practice. The next. So what we have now. Let us speak about post-socialist legal transformation. And I mentioned Karl Marx with Friedrich Engels, who almost 200 years ago, 180 years, created an utopia. And it was an utopia first because it was for all times and for all seasons, for all places in the world. And the same utopia we saw at the beginning of 1990s. So 30 years ago. For example, well-known philosopher, I will tell that he is not so deep as Karl Marx, but anyway, Francis Fukuyama, maybe you know, maybe a part of you know him. He wrote a book, The End of History and the Last Man. And it was at the time of the crash of the Soviet Union. It's a very specific philosopher. He is all the time philosopher a posteriori. After something, after the facts, and he is trying to understand these facts a posteriori, after they took place. But when he is trying to give some prospects, and maybe you know his articles about Russian invasion to Ukraine, he was author of many articles because he's still alive and active. They are not deep, and all the time he is erroneous, and facts are going other way. So what Francis Fukuyama said at the time of dissolution of Soviet Union, this is the end of history, because history, it was development through the conflict, and now the end of the history, because all the world will be democratic. And no more conflicts, no more war in the world. So it will be a very happy world. It's very funny. It's much more funny than the theory of Karl Marx, of course. At least Karl Marx said that maybe in future, in the very further, very long future, we will have a society without conflicts and the world without conflicts. But Francis Fukuyama was very brave and said that just now, right now, it will be a happy world. We have no happy world. It's about the transformation. So not only for Fukuyama, but for most of lawyers, for example, the transformation of post-Soviet legal systems was absolutely simple questions. Let us borrow the Western law. Let us borrow institutes from Western law and the Western state, and we all will be happy, and we will be prosperous, and all will be good with us. But this is not true. So, visions of transformation. By the way, at the beginning of Russian existence as a independent from Soviet Union state, they had also some aspirations to be democratic, but maybe not believed deeply in this anyway. So, but it was officially proclaimed. But today we can say that there are two main ideas in Russian legal thought about the transformation, that given the ideology of legal transformation in Russia. First, the idea of Slavic political and legal community. that was created not in Russia, but mostly or to a substantive part in Warsaw. The first who proclaimed this idea was German, was Herder, and next were Polish researchers, Ignacy Rakowiecki, Wacław Maciejowski. Polish people doesn't like them at all, and they ignoring that these researchers existed because they were pro-Slavic in political sense and pro-Russian, and both, by the way, both named researchers were financed by Russian Empire, and their books were published in Warsaw, but for Russian money, and then were translated into Russian also for Russian money. And so some very talented but very isolated utopists like Ignacy Rakowiecki and Wacław Maciejowski, but their works are very interesting. By the way, Wacław Maciejowski wrote the work in 5 volumes, The History of Slavic Law. And by its scale and by its deepness, it's one of the best in the history of, Polish science on law, Polish legal science, but very ideologized. Of course. So what about characteristics of this idea of Slavic legal family? And I will take characteristics from Vladimir Sinyukov. He is a key person in Russia who supporting this idea and who found it in deeper and deeper. The originality of Russian statehood. Russian statehood does not disappear, this originality does not disappear after a long reception, long borrowing of foreign political and legal institutions. It's all the time original. And the future of this statehood is a very close connection between law and the state. The second, another feature, the development of the economy historically and now relies on its collective forms, which gives rise to special work ethics, solidarity, labor democracy. By the way, it's also very old and very funny idea that was deeply rooted in Polish, in German, in English legal thought. In all these schools or national schools, they proclaimed at the especially at the middle of 19th century, that the base of this the originality was the collective forms of communities and community form of production, community form of village communities, form of life. For example, there was well-known work by Maine, Henry Sumner Maine, British professor, about village communities. But every this nation, but especially German and especially Russian, took this as a flag. We are very original. We are not as others because we have such a communality and communal life and communal land and other things, of course. But this is not true. But for socialism and for the new ideas, the idea of collectivism is very profound one. The next originality, Russian originality features is the dominance of collectivist elements of legal consciousness. And individual is not separated from the state. All interests of individual could be embraced and cutted in the state, in society. Next, which is also important, the close connection of the principles of law and state with the specifics of orthodoxy, of Eastern Orthodox Church, and emphasis of the spiritual life of the person. and of corresponding ethical norms. I cannot put it without brackets. It has to be with brackets. Selflessness of Russians, piety of Russians, special, more than in other nations, of course. So, and for creators of and supporters of the idea of Slavic legal family, socialism was natural for Russia, and it's closest to Russian mentality. I had an interesting instance on one international conference. It was a conference on comparative law in Washington, and one of the leaders of Russian lawyers, Slavists, Vladimir Lafitsky, he proclaimed that even Stalin, he was absolutely natural for Russian consciousness, for Russian mentality. And Stalin is a part of us, and it's inseparable part of us. After this, I have written a review article about that conference and named that, I saw the really wise person, but he's saying such things. He's very good lawyer, by the way, and practical lawyer. Worked mostly for American corporations, by the way, not for Russians, because American corporations paid him more. But at the same time, he's a Slavist, so Stalin is inseparable part of us. And this is absolutely true. When you see the sociology, and when Russians are asked who were the main political leaders most prominent in Russian history, and they're naming Stalin, Ivan Grozny, Ivan the Terrible, Peter the Great, Peter the One, and some other. But if we will take first five, 4 of them are leaders that were, known by their cruelty, by their repressions against own population, and other things. And for Russians are heroes. They are heroes. They are, of course, heroes. If you will see Russian doctoral theses, for me it was all the time shock. Before the war, they sent me some, we have such form, and they have the same after referat. So it's a short referat of your doctoral thesis. And they sent me some after referats and expected from me some reviews. It's needed for defending the thesis. And in this after referats, I saw that Stalin was a very good manager, and the repressions were a good mechanism to develop society and economy. But sometimes some repressions were more numerous, more scaled that society needed. So repressions are absolutely normal. And it doesn't matter what if a person guilty or not, because economy needs you, and Far East and Siberia needs some new population, and we want and we need slave labor of people in prisons and in concentration camps. And this is normal. Nothing about morals, nothing about law. But in some instances, these repressions were more scaled than the economy and society needed. So this is the essence, the understanding of mentality. It's another. So socialism was natural. It's not only the idea of these crazy Slavists. They are not crazy. They are just, if you will start to understand Russians strictly, what they're saying, that's enough. No any mystery, no enigma. Just understand them strictly, and just put a structure in the words, and this is true. Nothing more to be added. And of course, the anti-legalism of Russians, the idea of anti-legalism of Russians. The social order is based not on law, but on moral principles and on paternalism. Paternalism of state over the individual. And on communalism, of course, so communes, collectivism, and other things. Another version of that Russians given of development of the legal system is Eurasian legal family. And one of the, not the author, because this idea originated in the 1920s, so 100 years ago. But now it's very popular, and one of the propagators of this idea, Alexander Dugin, a very well-known professor of Moscow University, by the way, and author of many textbooks. And about 20 years ago, and in his textbook on geopolitics, the foundations of geopolitics, it was 20 years ago. He wrote that, of course, Ukraine should not exist. It should be divided, and Russia should have a bigger part. And a small part for Poland also, it's a present, please take it. And maybe smaller parts to Romania, to Hungary, if they prefer. If they not prefer, we will take it, but something like that. And it was official textbook. And it has a special status, so recommended by Ministry of Education. And by the way, if you think that Putin producing any new ideas, you're wrong. He's not producing even new, no new word. All the brain of Putin and all his ideas about law, about society, about state, about Russia, about geopolitics are already written. And he is a pupil of Ivan Ilyin, very well-known Russian fascist and Nazi, real Nazi, Russian Nazi, not hidden, but absolutely strict. He was Nazi. He is a pupil of Alexander Dugin, and he is not hiding this. And something like this. And if you will take some Russian textbooks, for history textbooks, he didn't add something to this textbook. If you will read them carefully, so Ukraine does not exist, and to erase Poland is a Russian glory, and other things, it's still in textbooks. Could you expect some changes in mind of the whole nations, of the whole Russian nation? No. New pupils come in schools, and they're taught that please take it another way. Please divide Poland with our friends. Why not to do it? Why not? No changes. But the idea of Eurasian legal family, so it's a synthesis of Europe and Asia, but it's very formal synthesis, because Western ideas are foreign, are alien to us, so, especially about human rights and about freedoms, about democracy, about political pluralism, about separation of power. So collectivism, state-centrism, or paternalism, of course, priority of duties over rights, and the same. And the special mission of Russia, who is teaching and re-educating post-Soviet societies. Of course, and it has to protect itself from the West. And by the way, I'm sure they have to protect themselves from the West, because if they will be not protected, they will be erased, because of course these ideas are not compatible with the life of the region and of the world, of course. And so the idea, what is Eurasia? What is important? That for Eurasia, humans in their worldview are subjected and have to subject their life to the force of nature. They have to be self-isolated from outside the world, and they have to be deep in their inner spiritual life. And the West is completely other. It's alien to us, because the West is trying to transform the nature. to be active. Why these ideas are important, I will say later. Just read the Russians, they're saying what they want to say. What next is important? That is absolutely out of the lens, out of the oculars of lawyers. But this is maybe most important in the legal sphere. It's the process of imitation of Western law reception. And not only in Russia. I'm taking Russia as ideal type, but it's a group of post-Soviet systems, especially Russia, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, to some extent Armenia. They're changing independently, but it's quite characteristical for them. Administrative or bureaucratic state. The dominant position in society are servicemen. And this servicemen in this state is separate from the rest of, from the society needs. And state apparatus not counts with the interest of society. And it's reproducing its power. Sometimes given the places by will. Do you know the old anecdote that the son of Russian colonel, asking his father, if I will be also a colonel? Yes, of course, my son. But maybe I will be a general? No. Why? Because general also has son. And the son of general will be general, and you as the son of colonel, you will be colonel. So you have to understand your place in the world. This is very characteristic, of course. Next, about the imitation, I will place more attention on this. Borrowings from Western law were present in Soviet constitutions, in Soviet laws. Sometimes in distorted form. And the same we see now in the post-Soviet states. The borrowings, the reception of Western law and of international law is presented. But the mechanism of implementation of this law mostly lacking. They are not foreseen. So something is declared, but it declared just to, to look better. If I'm wearing a cravat, I am not changing myself, but maybe I'm looking more official in some situations. So these states are wearing cravats, bought in Paris or in New York for huge money, but they're not changing themselves. It's just a ritual, and that's all. No more. This is very important. Next, now we can speak about a new model of imitation of Western law. And although private property and freedom of entrepreneurship are recognized, they are largely neutralized by norms of administrative law. So we have administrative law and administrative practice versus norms proclaimed in constitution and in civil code, for example. And this administrative practice, and which overuse in administrative law, provides for a number of obstacles for entrepreneurship, for private initiative. Permissive procedure for establishing enterprise, licensing of activities, the introduction of various operating conditions for enterprises, unjustified requirements for products. And this is in the time where, after privatization, most of the state property was monopolized by the bureaucracy and related persons. So, for some people, laws and administrative obstacles are not the case. for others, it's working. It's also the well-known joke, and it's quite old, that for friends all should be will be good, and for enemies just law. So law killing enemies if it's overused, and they overuse it, overusing all the administrative practices and administrative law to to erase concurrency, competitiveness in economy. It's quite important. The next about imitation, detailed control over society. This is a slogan of social state. It's very popular. It's very popular in all post-Soviet state. The state should be social. It should secure the citizen. But this is really the weight of the control and reproducing the largest armies of servicemen who will do this paper coming to this and this for this, and we securing your rights. We are not securing your rights. We are taking most resources for the state, and then in the manual regime we are giving or not giving, and the same for the citizen, for individual, and the same for regions. The next is the centralization. We are given to this region or to this region, we will decide, because this region bribes us better, and this region never bribes us, we will not give something to this region. Or in this region, the leader of this region, we don't like him more. And we will not give needed costs to this region. Up to, you will understand, the servicemen in this province, in this region will understand this leader has to be removed, and when he will be removed, we will give this money to you. And so it's a manipulation. This manual regime is total manipulation by the state. The state is really that Leviathan that taken all the costs and all the means to control the society. And what is characteristical in this the centralization of power in the hands of president. And if you will see a good example with Putin in the time of the war, he never saying bad news. He also saying about good results. If results are not good, and last year the results for them are not good, of course, somebody is saying, and somebody is responsible. So the prime minister will be responsible for economy, and Ministry of Defense will be responsible for defeats on the territory of Ukraine. But president all the time is saying, instead of president really controls every step of prime minister, of Ministry of Defense, other things. So he is ruling, but he has no responsibility. It's a very, very interesting position. And in some states, the power of president, the seat of the president is given by will or to your son, like it was in Azerbaijan, of course with elections. But everybody understood that the son will be elected. And the same as it was in Russia, when Yeltsin said his very famous phrase, "I'm tired. I'm going. I'm leaving the table," something like that. And please consider Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin was nobody. He's not no more talented than the other leaders of that time. For example, in Russia, they had Kasyanov or Kiriyenko, who had much more talents to control the economy and develop economy, and to give some liberal reforms. Maybe liberal in brackets, but at least a little bit. But Yeltsin preferred Putin, and it was his will. It was because the defeat of Russia in Chechnya. And everybody understood that it will be war. He was called to do a war. If you, but I don't want you to see me as a, just anti-Russian, and that's all. If you will see the contemporary politics of United States, and you will see the elections of George Bush, and George Bush the younger, and there were a deep problem in time of elections, and the result was not known, and results were counted and counted one more time and one more time, and why George Bush, in the situation of equal chances of him and his opponent, took the power? Because he told to some oil aristocracy, oil oligarchs, and by the way, his whole government was consisted of oil oligarchs. It's true. Vice President, the Ministry of Defense, even the press secretary of White House, they were all owners of large oil companies. And the first, he told them that he will do a war for oil, to change the oil architecture of the world in the more privileged, to get more privileged position. And he had a support of army, because he told army that it will be a war. Wow, good for army. And the same, he had the support from big military industry, because he told that it will be very expensive war. And we will order. I am telling about real things. And it's not just because I am thinking in this way. It was true. And first, what appeared, with terrorism in New York, and then very long, very expensive, and very resultive in the understanding of oil flows, war in Afghanistan, in Iraq. So it's another things, but we are speaking more about post-Soviet countries. So the concentration of power. The next about imitation. I have already told about state centralization and manual character of costs, and manual character of power distribution among regions. The next is a manipulation of state apparatus, the controlling of mass media. And especially this is the case of Russia. It's a full control of mass media, and you could be sure that if on central television or central news agency something was said, that personally Putin said that. But in that moment, he preferred somebody to tell something that he wants to say, and that's all. So it's indivisible. And the next, the elements of civil society, of civil culture, and of people is very weak. It's true. We see the same on the example of Russia, the atomization of society. They are not ready together and to do something together, to form real association, massive, I mean, and to do some actions together. I was a witness. It's quite hard to remember. I was a witness of Bolotnaya. If you know this, it was the largest protest in Russia in 2011 in Moscow. And I was a witness. I was absolutely desperate about these people. I saw that, for example, 3 policemen running after about 20 people. Most of them are men. That was a dead end. And they took all these people in that dead end and beat them. And beat it up to the blood, beat it up to the, unconsciousness, how to say. But you understand me. And it was shock. 20 people, and they're doing nothing. Doing nothing. They're waiting for stick on their head. And the heads, and it's impossible. For example, in Ukraine, this policeman after that end will forget all the service in police, and they will forget any wish about controlling the people, because they will be beaten. And people will take these sticks and other equipment and will go to beat other policemen and take their sticks and their weapons and their things. That is the difference. But anyway, so it's very weak and atomized society that is not civil, but by the definition. And what we have with this imitation? We have something like quasi-West. So it's not real West, maybe it's quasi-West. In most post-Soviet states, there is no open confrontation with Western law and legal values. Of course, Russia has absolutely real and absolutely not hidden confrontation. But most have no confrontation. These societies, these states, this legal system recognizing let them be Western values, legal values and principles. But it's also only a formality. And it was a condition to get into the international organization and to ensure the political and economical development, to ensure the export of goods, other things, especially of oil and gas, but of other resources and products. But it was just a formality to decorate your state and your legal system with some principles of Western law and of international law. Decorate, and this is decoration. And everybody understands that this is not working. The same as it was in the Soviet Union with Helsinki acts of Organization of Cooperation and Security in Europe. We proclaimed, we ratified, but we will not use. Okay. So it's something like quasi-West. But what is important, that this is borrowing, this reception is anyway important, because in some situation, in the time of the change of the situation, Western legal and political institutions can acquire a real character in the process of social development. And reverse process, what we see in Russia now, can also take place. Further neutralization of these institutions, or even partial formal rejection of them, as we see in Russia when she went out of Council of Europe. Because the conflict of these values and of decisions of European Court with the Russian system became too obvious. They tried to neutralize this practice of European Court, and it was a decision of Russian Constitutional Court that any decision of European Court has to be checked and reviewed if it in accordance with Russian Constitution or not, something like that. But this was not a solution, and all all the decisions were against Russia. So finally, they took only possible decision to withdraw from the European Convention, to went out of Council of Europe. The next, which is also very hidden, and not taken into account by lawyers the real legal ideology. I have spoken with you about the idea of Eurasian legal family, of Slavic legal family, but this is just the theories. But what is more massive and more influences society? Church. And we have to speak about social doctrines of Russian Orthodox Church. First was adopted in 2000. Foundation of the social concept of the Russian Orthodox Church. It was adopted in the time of previous patriarch, Moscow Patriarch. Previous Moscow Patriarch was quite intellectual person, and he was, not in the conflict with the secular world. So, in the foundations of the social concept of the Russian Orthodox Church, it was said that the human rights are universal. And we have, as a church, no conflict with the idea of human rights. And even human rights is based on biblical teaching, which is true, of course, as for me, but anyway. And that's why any religious person has to follow secular national law and obligations towards the state. But what next? The next foundations of the doctrine of the Russian Orthodox Church. Rock here looks good, but without one letter. It's really a rock change. The doctrine on dignity, freedom, and human rights in 2008. The personal author of this doctrine is the Patriarch Kirill Gundyaev, new Patriarch of Russia. And in these doctrines, what is stated? That human rights are extort reality. So it's given, but given with coercion, yes? And this idea borrowed from the West, and it's alien to us. And duties of humans, of a man in former understanding of words, are more important. And rights, only that rights are important, that are rising from duties. It's the same as it was in socialist time, that that was a doctrine that human rights could be implemented only in the instance that they helping to build socialist society. It's a very interesting formula. If you want to implement your right, but it doesn't help to build socialist society, so the state and the court are not obliged to implement your human rights. It's a very interesting formula. This is the same. And what is important here, that it was proclaimed, it's 15 years ago, that religious person is not obliged to follow secular law, to follow national law, if the state not taken into account religious values. So any priest, and especially patriarch, could proclaim it anytime that that or another law, secular law, national law, state law, is not in accordance with Russian Orthodox Church teaching. And by the way, it was a hidden conflict in Russia after the adoption of this document. State stopped to give church buildings and others, and some state property that was formerly church property. State stopped to give it back. for longer time. But with Putin, he doesn't want a conflict with church, and of course, Kirill and the Russian Orthodox Church is backing Putin. But what is important in it's a fundamentalism. It's a real fundamentalism. You are as a citizen and at the same time religious person. It's a conflict inside of you. Which law to follow, religious law or secular law? And the church is claiming that religious law and religious doctrine is higher than the secular law. So real fundamentalist state, not Islamic one, because we are used to understand fundamentalism as to be Islamic. It's Russian fundamentalism, Russian Eastern Orthodox fundamentalism. It's true. By the way, these documents are not secret. You can find them on official sites.
In Poland, it's the same.
The problem is that in Ukraine, in Kievan Patriarchat, so in Ukrainian church, they not proclaimed a new doctrine at all. So mostly they used, and according to some individual acts of church, they use the same doctrine, fundamentalist doctrine. But the newly created Ukrainian Eastern Orthodox Church is not following, for sure not following, but they are not producing own doctrine. Yes, in Poland there were some conflicts also. Of course, but I'm worrying about time. No, it was just the beginning. Okay, so what about conclusions? First, in my opinion, the legal systems of socialist states were and are mixed, and they belong to socialist legal family, and at the same time contain a complex of principles and sources of law inherited or borrowed from legal systems of other types. So socialist law was not, an ideal type like Roman German or Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-American type, or we can call them civil and common law. To a large extent, the socialist legal family became the sphere of extension of tentatively Eastern, tentatively because East is different, traditions of social regulation. Socialist ideology turned to be compatible and close to Eastern traditions. And the essence of the socialist law and the legal systems of most of post-Soviet systems, it's in essence Eastern law. When I talked about the idea of Slavic legal family, when I talked about the idea of Eurasian legal family, when I talked about the social doctrine of Russian Orthodox Church and Russian Orthodox Church controlling Orthodox churches in most of post-Soviet states, still, all these doctrines, in essence, saying about Eastern and more, even more, to be precise, Confucian principles. One is, for example, one is non-interference of a person, of individual, into the social life. You have to understand your place, and not you cannot change anything, as Russians now say. What we can change? We can change anything. So why to try to change? You will be in prison. And that's all. Not changing something. Go away to immigration, or sit very, silently. Another very Confucian idea is the idea of world harmony. Before you are thinking of your individual rights, of your interests, please think about the society, about the world. And maybe the world the society, your commune, their interests are not in accordance with you. And you are so small, and society is so big, and you have to be in harmony with them. So forget about your rights and your interests, because society is ruling and the state is ruling. Forget about your individual things. This is the same. The idea of paternalism, of collectivism, of other things, it's compatible with this. So, but even in a number of post-Soviet countries, the main parameters of evolution have changed little. And characteristics of most of post-Soviet systems are omnipotence and extra-legal development of states. So states developing themselves mostly in extra-legal way, not in legal but extra-legal way. And regimes are mostly authoritarian and even totalitarian. The next characteristic is low and wave-like participation of society in state affairs. So sometimes русский бунт бессмысленный, беспощадный, if you understand the Russian. It's very, very old quotation. So the Russian social unrest that has no real goals and is very cruel. This is the way. So sometimes they're going on the wave and it's unrest, something like that. But it's not the work of civil society in the in the planned way all the time. Organizations, part of civil society, they're trying to change something, to influence, to become bigger, and they're completely suppressed. So low and wave-like participation of society in state affairs. Political absenteeism, if you understand absenteeism, so self-isolation, I'm absent of the majority of the population. The idea of non-interference and isolation of a person. What Russians saying, that they are more spiritual, individually spiritual, while Western people trying to change something, they're changing their own soul, their struggle for own soul. So isolating and make yourself better in isolated way, because if you will say somebody that you want to do you better, and if it takes some of your political views, of course you will be suppressed. Of course, the idea of impossibility of achieving changes. Instead of defending one interest, the idea of adaptation for the sake of survival. Next, political and ethical norms and not law is the main means of regulating of social relations. It's not only in post-Soviet systems, but it's a real way. In many parts of the world, not law is ruling, but political and ethical norms. And not me who formulated, my friend Ugo Mattei, very well-known Italian partist. Law can be invoked, law can be distorted, law can be ignored, depending on the need of the state. And of course, this does not prevent the use of law in conditionally neutral situations. For example, you have a land parcel of the land, and your neighbor have a parcel of land, and your neighbor is not the member of the party Единая Россия, and you are not the member of the ruling party. And maybe among you it could be a case in the at the court, and court will decide just neutrally who of you has a right for for the land, because nobody interested. And this small parcel of land, 6 соток, something like that, nobody interested. But if you have a bigger land, or you are a member of ruling party, or you related to the power, the decision of the court will be absolutely other. Even for 6 sotek, for small villa in the village. And this quite ethical and political norming of society is a part of culture of legal skepticism. Nobody believes in law. Really, when I'm saying nobody or I'm saying all, I'm saying about the vast majority. Of course, some percent of people see in the world in another way and have another views, other things, but we are speaking about vast majority of the population. And the same applies to the role of law in international relations. The same situation. If you are not invoking law in the society, you are against invoking law in the international relations. The same as Russia with Ukraine. It's the same, absolutely the same. Crimea was always Russian. What means Russian? Poland was also Russian. Switzerland was a part of Holy Roman Empire of Germanic nation. So what about Switzerland? Roman or Germanic? I don't know. Or we have to divide Switzerland. Half to Romans, so to Italians, and half to Germans. Why not? It was always the part of this empire up to 1806. So it was always for centuries Roman and Germanic. Is it an argument? Crimea was Roman. Crimea was Ottoman. Crimea was a part of Russian Empire, but not of Russia. And it was finally a small, some dozens of years, a part of Russian Federation in the Soviet time. Just some dozens of years. It was always. So it's ethical ideas, historical ideas, political ideas, but nothing about law. The same inside society, the same outside society, because worldview is the same. It's only with a mental disorder you can divide your brain, and of course, for inner situation, I have one brain, and for international relations, I have another brain. It's the same. If no law, so no law. And they absolutely sincerely not understand the West, the international organization, Ukrainians. You are strange people. What are you talking about? Who are interested in your law? We have a power. We have something in the school textbook. And what you're talking about, what law is about. And the same in all situations. But at the same time, as a conclusion, according to formal characteristics, the law of these states, post-Soviet states, is similar to European continental law, to the civil law or Roman Germanic law, European continental law. It will be the same. So, as for me, it's my conclusion, the law of most post-Soviet states is Eastern in essence and quasi-Western in its form. It looks like. It's like you are taking some sweets and you see the paper on them is like Western, and for example, made in France, and inside Russian sweet. So it's something the same about the legal system of systems of majority of post-Soviet states. And if and when you will deal with these systems, you have to count this. You have to understand this, that the mentality, that the principles, the worldview is mostly Eastern. And you have to deal with them like this. I'm taking too much time. I will ask for a little bit additional time, but I have to give you an example. Yesterday, I was on a legal forum. We had been with Professor Turlukovsky on European legal forum. It was in Marriott here in Warsaw. And we spoke to one Polish businessman who dealt with Turkmenistan, with Turkmenistan. And he told the story that relations were superb. Because he negotiated some people who associated, related to ruling elite, and all was guaranteed. He took cotton from Turkmenistan, and he was allowed to pay for this cotton after he taken the physical amount of this cotton. Other things, anything could be negotiated, and they were ready just do business with us sincerely, and that's all. But after that, he was absolutely shocked. He was told that we will give you a large amount of cotton, and for this amount, please don't pay us, but organize international tennis tournament. And first stars of tennis have to arrive to Turkmenistan and have this tournament. And we will pay them large, very large honoraries. And these honoraries, by the way, were paid in cash. Very post-Soviet way, in cash, in real valises. To Roger Federer, please give your valise. The next star, please, your valise of money. It's abnormal, absolutely abnormal for these people. But you have to organize. And we want it in this way and in this way. So it's, another mentality. You will not understand this. This was not in my, we had an agreement. It was not the part of agreement. And so what? We will give you more cotton. It's another way. So, Eastern in essence and quasi-Western in its form. What about vector of transformation? As for me and as for research of many other people whom I know, the political and legal systems of Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and possibly also Armenia, are in the process of transformation. The societies of these states have mainly or to a large extent European integration orientations. To a greater or lesser extent, the mentioned post-Soviet futures are characteristic also to them. But these futures are perceived as negative and temporary, and the will to overcome them is formed. For example, of course, Ukraine has a corruption. Poland has great corruption. But of course, Ukraine has more. If you will know more about Swiss corruption, you will be absolutely shocked. How corruption is widespread, especially political corruption in Switzerland. It's about novels. But anyway, so corruption is everywhere. When you will learn about American law and you will learn about Supreme Court of United States that never changing its decision. Yes, because for oil in Mexican Gulf, 5 times the decision was changed because too large, too big amounts of money. 5 times. It's about corruption. But of course, for example, Ukraine has a larger corruption than Poland, than Switzerland, than the United States. Let it be so. It's very difficult to measure, but I believe in this. But this corruption is understood and perceived by people now very negatively. It's not our way. Of course, some people use it, but mostly as a very negative future that is also temporary, that should be overcome. But as I told with Switzerland, I am not sure that it will be overcome. Of course, it will exist. Of course. Next. And comparative lawyers and lawyers at all point to the presence of exactly these features, which I named, albeit to a lesser extent, in the legal cultures and legal systems of the states of Central and Eastern Europe. And as Hungarian researchers saying, important differences exist mostly related to the non-norm layers of these legal cultures. It was said about Poland, about Hungary, and about other states. So don't be idealistic. But if you will take a scale, so the scale of the problems, for example, in Ukraine is much bigger than in Poland. Maybe I believe in this, but we perceive this as temporary. And the transformation vector is defined for these countries: Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and Georgia. It will be defined. Armenia, of course, it will be defined. And more or less unified post-Soviet political and legal space no longer exists. We can speak about different groups of legal systems. Maybe they have still many common features, but the vector of transformation is absolutely different. And orientations and values are different. And I have some examples, but I don't know if we have enough time. Examples are quite interesting, but okay. Just to understand, first example is a resolution of Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe. It's a resolution almost 20 years ago, measures to dismantle the heritage of former communist totalitarian system. By the way, I highly recommend this resolution to understand the ideas about the transformation of post-Soviet legal systems, but it was a little bit naive. But what was in the center? The next slide will be about main ideas, but here the most interesting about the dangers of failed transformation. It's 20 years ago. At worst, the result could be the velvet restoration of totalitarian regime, if not a violent overthrow of the fledgling democracy. In that worst case, the new undemocratic regime of a bigger country can present also an international danger for its weaker neighbors. It was 20 years ago. And the next, from the same document, you will see the main problems and main principles that were pressed on. Demilitarization. What means demilitarization? That many spheres of social life were really in Soviet time militarized. And they still are, for example, I wanted to tell, for example, in Russia, but not only in Russia, and in Ukraine also. Some spheres have to be demilitarized. For example, military prison administration and many other things. The next, decentralization. Because the roots, for example, of Russian contemporary totalitarianism, it's a centralization. When the center controls all the finances, all the power, all the other things. That's why you can concentrate all this for a war or for repression or for other things. When you have reforms of decentralization, and I know this reform was quite for a long time and resulted in Poland, and we had the same reform or close reform in Ukraine, and it was a large factor to overthrow the authoritarianism as a regime. Demonopolization and privatization, they failed. It was a naive, because they failed. Mostly they failed, and we have monopolies and oligarchs, but it is not the end of the process. And I believe we will have better results. And debureaucratization. So remove most of administrative obstacles, the requirements for business, many procedures that for bureaucracy to flourish, to become bigger and bigger, and to create a new norms to reproduce the privileges and the bribes in the cost of society. Next, it's just a citation. One of Ukrainian acts is just an example, because in Ukraine we had many symbolic acts, and one of them was on condemnation of communist and national socialist totalitarian regimes. And after that we had a long court process, because in constitutional court it was very interesting, and court finally stated the same position. So the communist totalitarian regime was in essence the same as the Nazi regime. This is the core of this law, and this is quite important. And now what we have, for example, as just an example, in Ukraine we have decommunization, desovietization of legislation. No more Soviet acts will be in our legal system, work in our legal system. So, and the process of recodification, the process of taking into account the positions of European Court of Human Rights, of Venice Commission, of other things, all these are parts of reforms that are not easy, but we are going this way. So it's a more symbolical one. And the next will be very funny for you, but the next is true. Please be brave. This is quotations from article by chairman of Constitutional Court of Russia. He is still a chairman of a Constitutional Court, and he was very well-known theorist and historian of law. By the way, I used many of his works that were written in Soviet time. His writing, I will not quote all these things, but I highly recommend it. It was published in Russian official newspaper, Русская газета. What he's speaking about? That the reform in Russia that gave peasants freedom, released them from serfdom, it was bad reform, because it was great link of serf peasants with nobility. It was a foundation of Russian nation. And the same other things, that the individual freedom, it's very bad. It's very bad because it's ruining our society. He's sitting unbearable freedom, unbearable. So it's impossible for us to bear this freedom. It's not normal for us. He's a chairman of Constitutional Court. If you need more evidence of mentality of the society, and this was published with many other his articles. It was not the last. It was not the only. In the official newspapers, and people reading, and nobody even reviewed. Nobody. They taking this for granted. It's normal. What the problem is? And some more citations. He is speaking not about the legal normativity. He is speaking about moral normativity. What is moral normativity? You have one morals, you have other morals. It's not unified morals. If you will use our morals in the court, it will be anarchy. And it will be, of course, the losing of freedom. And he's telling about the dissolution of Soviet Union is a tragedy, the same as Putin saying this. And this new system is alien for us. And the last, just some literature. First part is in English, just to recommend. I'm highly recommended you the first, the interaction of legal systems. It's a large monography. It was published in London. I'm sure, I believe Warsaw University has it. There are many unique topics in this monography. By the way, it was for the first time the comparative analysis of the social doctrines of Orthodox Church, for example, and many other things, and different views of transformation and the interaction of legal systems, of post-Soviet legal systems. And the next is also very important. It's a lecture of William Butler. It was published many times. What makes socialist legal systems socialist? As for me, he's my friend, he's my old friend, but I believe he's a little bit naive in this article. But anyway, he has his own vision. And maybe the next is the last. Some literature in Russia, in Russian, and something here is just in Russian. I believe that most of you knows Russian. I gave nothing in Ukrainian. First is a very interesting researcher, Denisov. He is a little bit repressed. He has no possibility now to teach in the university. He's from provincial Russian university, but very interesting researcher. Second, this article, Зоркин, chairman of Constitutional Court. Суд, который скорый, правый и равный для всех. Судебная реформа Александра II. Of course, this is the end. And thank you, Mr. Yaroslav Turlukovsky, for not interrupting me. And and gave me more time that it was even maybe possible. Thank you all. I tried to make this lecture less boring, but I think it was even more boring than I expected. But anyway, maybe you have some questions you survived after this longer lecture. Questions or ideas, or maybe you have you want to share some views.
Thank you very much, such a brilliant lectures, and now we can open the discussion if you want to ask some questions, please. Too hot, yes, the first.
Is it possible to ask a question from online?
Yeah, sure, you are welcome. Please.
But Martin Skubishevsky was first. Okay. Online, okay, of course, please.
You
No,
can switch on the camera, or.
Oh,
if you
yes,
want.
of course. Yeah. Am I visible right now? Oh, yeah. Yes. Hello, sir. Thank you for amazing lecture. It was not boring, completely not boring. It was extremely interesting for me. I wanted to ask if you have any good literature advices on Slavophile context of the Russian law, and is there any connection between
What is the
Slavonic
dynamic?
and
What is it?
I'm
sorry.
Excuse me,
is there some problem or something?
You can speak more loudly, please, because.
Okay. Am I heard now? Yeah, I wanted to ask about the Slavic context of the law. You mentioned Václav Maciejowski, and I wanted to ask if you have any literature on this topic.
Okay. Yes, I mentioned just Ignacy Rakovetsky and Václav Maciejowski. Sorry? Yes, I mentioned just some. I mentioned just Ignacy Rakovetsky and Václav Maciejowski. If you are interested in early history of Slavic idea, I can recommend also my book, theoretical foundations of comparative legal studies, and a special part of this book is on idea of Slavic legal family. Theoretical foundations of comparative legal studies. It's in 2 volumes, and I think it has to be in English. And also, by the way, in English you can find it only in library. But if you know Ukrainian or Russian, both, it was published also in Ukrainian and in Russian, and in free circulation in internet. In Ukrainian it's становлення теоретичних засад порівняльно-правових досліджень. Just put the beginning and you will find about the early period of Slavic idea. Становлення теоретичних засад порівняльно-правових досліджень. In Russian it will be становление теоретических оснований сравнительно-правовых исследований. There in free you can find. But about new literature about the new period of Slavic idea. So the bigger propagandists are Sinyukov. If you saw the slide, Sinyukov, Vladimir Sinyukov. You can find many of his books and articles in free circulation. Sinyukov. Another Lafitsky, Vladimir Lafitsky. Lafitsky, as Lafitte, you know, for gun. Lafitsky. He wrote the textbook in 2 volumes «Сравнительное правоведение в образах права». Very interesting and very anti-Western book. I wrote a review. A review was for 30 pages. After that, the author saw the review and wrote the answer to review about 100 pages. So, in the traditions of post-Soviet states, it's abnormal volume of reviews. But anyway, so. And in Odessa, a thesis was defended. The name of the author Ryazanov. And you can find the electronic version on site of Odessa Law Academy. They preserving the electronic versions of all theses. It's quite new thesis, quite large about Slavonic or Slavic law idea. By the way, Slavic law idea was popular internationally and popular for the longer time. I will put you an example, very funny example. In Jerusalem, there is an old hotel, old Austrian hotel. For religious people. You know this place? You're laughing. And in the hall of this hotel, you will see the sculpture, the big woman. No, it's not big woman. Big sculpture of woman, and she's taken 2 children in her hands. And it is written on the sculpture that the Austria is the mother of all Slavs. It was very popular. It was used politically in many ways. By the way, in Soviet time it was not officially used, but really the idea of the family of Slavic nations and the older brother in this family is Russian. It was quite popular. If you will see, it was a mix of nationalism and imperialism in that version. Very well-known toast by Stalin in 1945 for the victory of our peoples. Among them, Russian is the first and most important for the victory. Then some other nations were named, but it was stressed that Russian people are most important in the process of in this war. And it's just an example. Such so many other examples could be added. Thank you. I hope that I responded to your question. And Professor.
Thank you very much. Another one questions here.
Okay, because people here probably don't know me. I am Marcin Skubiszewski, Vice President of the Krzysztof Skubiszewski Foundation. We worked with Oleksiy Kresin for some time, and I came here on the invitation by Oleksiy. And thank you very much for the invitation.
Thanks to the foundation of Skubiszewski. And thankful to this, I wrote my book about Warsaw University, Warsaw lawyers, 200 years ago, about the ideas. And this book was published in Ukraine, and then in the United States it was published in English. And so it's a pleasure for me to meet you here.
Okay, and for me too. But okay, so first remark, I am very grateful for you for this presentation, because I am totally unable to understand why Russia is making this war. You know, this question, is it Putin's war or Russia's war? And it seems that the answer is that it is more Russia's war than Putin's war. And for me, I am a Western person. I am Polish, but I studied in France. For me, these things are just unthinkable. And you explained the unthinkable to us today, and thank you very much, because things are not any less horrible, but they are horrible, but at least they are explained, and I can have some beginning of understanding, thanks to you, of things that are just unthinkable.
Thank you.
So now the question, I have already observed the gradual transformation of Ukraine towards the legal system, the Western legal system, less corruption. What's the influence of the war on this process? Did it accelerate greatly, or it works its own course and the war doesn't play such a big role? What's the role of the war?
If it's possible, I will first speak about your comment and then about your question, but I remember both. About your comment about Russian mentality and the war. You know what is more horrible for the moment for me, even than the clear war intents and the will to prolong the war by Putin. Even more horrible is the position of Russian opposition. It's more horrible. Formally, it's anti-war. But when you will take it structurally, for example, it was occasion for 1 year of the large-scale invasion in February, and most of Russian opposition leaders made some statements, or video statement, or in the social media, or publishing articles. It's unbelievable for a Western person. It's unbelievable. For example, Navalny. If you remember, 9 years ago, he was asking about Crimea and said, Crimea is not a burger to pass it to one hand to the other hand like this. If it was a change in Crimea, so let it be changed. Nothing about law, nothing. But 9 years of war, and he's one of the moral leaders of opposition. And what he's saying, let us take away this Crimea to Ukraine because we have so many problems with this. We have enough lands. We don't need Crimea for the moment. Yes. And you know, so many sanctions. We have to do some sanctions. They want this Crimea to be given to Ukraine. Let us give it to Ukraine. It's something like this. Nothing about law. And he's asking, what about the transformations of a political regime in Russia, other things? He's speaking, Oh, of course, the transformation has to be very gradual. We will take new elections, and people will see that the war was not successful. Why to support Putin's regime? No, it's better to elect other people. And of course, we have to proceed with, the court should proceed with Putin. Maybe he is guilty. He, personally. Maybe. Court will find that Putin is guilty. Or maybe not, who knows? But anyway, personally. And all the same people will be at the top. And only gradual transformation. So no illustration, no other things. All these criminals are in power and they're ready to deal with this. No morals, no law, just like this. Or another, Yavlinsky. Of course, Yavlinsky is not true oppositioner, he's official oppositioner. He's very, very good for boxing, for official power. We have opposition here. And you see how weak this opposition is. But Yavlinsky, what is he's writing? We have to stop the war. We are so tied with this war and with these sanctions, we have to stop the war. And Ukrainians, why you want to prolong this war? Let us stop. Just on this, what you are staying here, and here we will stop the war. And what next? Nothing. The opposition leader, the official liberal of Russia, and what next? No criminal responsibility, no justice, nothing. They have no idea at all. The same Khodorkovsky. Khodorkovsky's views were even worse than Navalny or Yavlinsky, the same. And only a month ago they adopted a document like a collective manifesto of Russian opposition. And for the first time, it was said that we are against internal colonialism in Russia and external imperialism. It was said for the first time, even internal colonialism. So the understanding in Russia is really empire, even without this war with Ukraine, without control over Transnistria or Georgian territories or other things. In itself, for 1991, it's empire. It was, it is, and but these just words. And these words are without Navalny. Navalny has not supported this declaration. It's Khodorkovsky, Kasparov, and not Yavlinsky. Just some of them. And they are not representing the population and never represented. And on next elections, if there will be some elections, and even if they will be totally free, no administrative resources. Fantastic is on the second floor of the book story. But anyway, no influence, no interference. They will take maybe 15% maximum. And just because the war and the pessimism of people because of this war and because of the ruling regime. But in other conditions, they will take 5-10%. And that's all. And that's all. So I will tell you about example that is most horrible for me. I cannot understand. It's American sociological firm, not Russian. American sociological firm. But they made research about the views of Russians in Russia. Using telephone, using personal interviews, hiring people, different methods, and about 60% of population doesn't support war in Ukraine because it's not successful. But about 75% of population, supporting starting of new war in northern Kazakhstan or in Baltic states. Do you understand? We are against bigger part of the population is against of ongoing war because it's not successful for Russia. It's the same as with Navalny. Gave them this Crimea back because we have so many problems with this Crimea. We will take northern Kazakhstan. And we have the power and we have the right. Even no any thought about maybe we have no right to do this. Nothing. And about the evolution or transformation of Ukrainian legal system. Now we are trying more actively than before to become closer to the membership of in European Union. Maybe it's also a utopia or fantastic or something like that, but we are trying. And that's why the list of reforms becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And European colleagues proposing more and more and more. But European colleagues mostly never been to Ukraine and doesn't know Ukrainian problems. They are hiring Ukrainian analytical centers and sometimes successfully, sometimes not. And these centers and some maybe good researchers proposing variants of reforms that are needed for further democratization, for further liberalization of economy, of political life, of other things. I think it's a little success. That's enough for the time of the war. But after the war, it's not enough, of course. But anyway, Ukrainian movement, let it be to Western law, but it was also our heritage, historical. But okay, now we have it in distorted version of Soviet times, of Russian times. But anyway, Ukrainian movement is also not one way. It's also with waves, but the vector is one. It was from the beginning of independence, new independence, and it was never changed. Even in the time of Yanukovych, he tried, but he was not successful to change it. And even Yanukovych, by the way, it's funny, nobody remember. Even Yanukovych, in his presidential program, when he tried to become a president, in his presidential program, he wrote membership in European Union and in NATO. And in NATO, in the presidential program of Yanukovych is a membership in NATO. And in the war military doctrine, that was a new version that was approved in the time of Yanukovych, as a law, it was membership in NATO and European Union. Both organizations. As a law, when he controlled majority of the parliament.
But at that time, you have the law about the pozablokowy status, that is neutrality. You had this, so it like contradicts.
No, it's not contradicts, but because when it will be a moment, so now it's a vector of becoming closer, of approximation. Because not we who decide, not only we. Yes, we have to decide yes or not, but also all countries of NATO, all members of NATO have to decide. So now it's like a vector of development. And when the question will be, the issue will be precise, so at that time we will change the constitution. Because it's quite hard constitution, it's quite hard, difficult to change it. Even for the moment, the names of a number of cities are changed because they could be changed without the changes to constitution. But the names of regions are still Soviet, because it's very difficult to make the changes in the constitution. So we have the city Dnipro, but we have the still Dnipropetrovsk region. Because it's quite difficult, and every political group, every political party tries to do changes in the constitution in the packet, with number of other changes. And this is a game. And if you will not change this, we will not support you. We will not have enough voices in the parliament to change. Okay, we will support this, but we will not support this. Okay, we will not change constitution. Oppa. Something like that. It's political game. But to conclude, I think that we have some progress, but this progress is small, and this progress is not enough for the moment. And political party that is now monopolized power in Ukraine, it's very specific situation. We have never such situation. Then one party won the elections to such extent to monopolize all the power. And to by this very fact, even without details, it's not positive. We are not socialist country, not communist party, and not. I don't want this party to be ruling for.
Okay, thank you very much for your questions and answers. I seem so sorry, I'm a little bit late, but it's first I was thinking it was quite brilliant. So thanks a lot. Thanks for your patience. And we stop now recording, but we still would be online. I mean, I know maybe you are tired, but if you have any technical questions about school, I can answer today or tomorrow. I would be again, because remember, at not in the morning, but at 11 o'clock we have a new lectures. Professor Dikowska, yes, with more private lectures, I would say, without public law. So if someone are tired or just have no time, so I would be together with Professor Dikowska tomorrow and also answer your questions. But if you have any technical questions, please stay with us still. But thank you very much for Professor questions, for all who asked the questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for your patience. And for your patience, patience. Passion for your questions and for your liking your.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Dziękuję.